So today we are going to discuss certain human types and characteristics, especially the characteristics and behavior patterns, the conduct of those who have attained the highest level of spiritual evolution. What are the characteristics of a yogi? That's the subject that we are going to discuss today. In fact, this is described that in the 17th chapter, which is known as Saddhatraya Vibhaga Yoga. That's a name. Of course, we are not going verse by verse. We are not going to deal with the whole text chapter by chapter. But just for your information, this is the 17th chapter. It's called Saddhatraya Vibhaga Yoga in Sanskrit. In English, you may rather translate that into inquiry into three types of human beliefs in a general way. Now, this text deals with certain aspects of human psychology. That's the uniqueness of this chapter. And not psychology as it was understood and defined in the Western world till the coming of Freud, because it goes far beyond the behaviorist concepts of human mind and human psyche. Sometimes it is now called depth psychology. What is the essence of human being? If you analyze a human being in the light of how he interacts with other human beings, how he responds to the stimuli, the objects that he sees or hears in the external world, we get only a very superficial, only a very preliminary picture of the human mind. If you suppose you want to define the human being, what is he? Of course, everyone knows a human being is far beyond the body, the senses, whatever you could see. He has a mind, he has a behavior pattern. So all these together we define as personality. Now, in the science of yoga, a human being is far beyond this. Sometimes it is said in a purely physical sense that we are born naked and we go back naked. Birth and death, well, this is the most elementary, superficial, behaviorist reading of human personality. Yoga or Vedanta philosophy say that we are not born naked. Physically it may be true, but we are well dressed. We are extremely well dressed. We are extremely well equipped. We are born with a huge treasure kept in a bag. We are coming into this world with a bag, huge bag. This bag is full of tendencies, impressions, characteristics, etc. In modern times, some psychiatrists try to explain multiple personality and what they used to call schizophrenia in terms of inherited tendencies. We always feel this in most of our difficult times in life. I dealt with this subject on a few occasions during the Sunday lectures. There is always a conflict between what we would like to do, what we are actually willing to do, willing to make a lot of sacrifice to do, and then what we actually do. Now, what is that mysterious power which prevents us from doing what we really want to do. If you define a human being as a physical being, we have to define him as a computer. And computer certainly doesn't make any mistake. It does what it wants to do. Because it is that intelligence is programmed into him, into it, the system. There is no conflict for a machine. The very fact that we face a dilemma in life means there is a higher element, higher dimension of our personality and what we normally present ourselves to the outside world. So, Yoga and Vedanta explain this in terms of inherited human characteristics, sometimes called, there is some angel, some God in us. There is also some beast and some devil also. That's why this conflict comes. There is an angel, there is a God within, there is also the beast and the devil. So maybe the archetypal biblical interpretation of the competition between the archangel, the Satan, and God to recruit human souls is perhaps a symbolic representation of this phenomenon. Now, Vedanta calls it the innate disposition. Our real personality is our innate disposition, which combines both, which contains both the good and also the bad. So these samskaras, in a way, belong to these two warring groups, the groups of the angels and the groups of the Satan, the Beelzebub, whatever you may call it, which is, of course, Now, it's an archetypal theological representation. The pull of the flesh, the sin, the tendency to commit sin, and also the tendency to turn to God. These human characteristics, as I said, are divided into two mutually conflicting groups. Now, what is human life? Human life is worthwhile. Rather, yoga is nothing but an attempt to swim against the current of some of our natural tendencies. Some of our natural tendencies, as I said, tendencies belong to two groups. Tendency to do undesirable things and to tendency to go beyond all this, the tendency to go to a higher dimension, to attain a higher dimension of our personality. So whenever we try to make an attempt to evolve spiritually, immediately you find there are a number of obstacles. Spiritual obstacles, that is the topic here. I didn't deal with this subject there, there is no occasion. Really speaking, if anybody finds there's a conflict, it means he or she is on the right track. A person who says, I'm absolutely calm and quiet, fully satisfied. He may be satisfied with his bank account. He may be satisfied because the stock market is improving. But if he feels or he may be a great saint, which is perhaps a remote possibility. So in most cases, that kind of satisfaction is the satisfaction that comes out of sensory enjoyments. The moment you try to practice, to do some spiritual practice, immediately you are actually trying to swim against the current. Now, if you enter a river, if there is a strong current, and if you just simply stand still, the current will take you in the opposite direction. If you make some effort, you may be able to keep status quo. You may prevent yourself from being swept in the opposite direction. But if you really want to evolve, if you really want to go forward and swim against the current and make progress, and want to move forward, then you have to make tremendous effort. Because you have to withstand the pressure of the opposite current, and then you have to make additional effort to move forward. Sometimes it is compared to a lake. Mind is a lake. Human personality is a lake. This chapter divides human personalities, human belief systems, human activities like sacrifice, charity, all these into three characteristics. The highest type, those who do everything with total unselfishness, with absolute peace and tranquility and serenity within. It's called Satvikism, it's called Satvika. That's a Sanskrit word used, perhaps. I don't know if at all it has got an English equivalent. But the word really literally means, in terms of human behavior and activities, it means a total unselfishness, internal purity, absolute serenity, complete harmony within, peace and tranquility. Remember, it is not inertia or inaction. It has got another name. That stage is the worst. In fact, a person who is calm and quiet and tranquil, is absolutely in peace and harmony within, is capable of, if he wants, capable of putting up tremendous effort. That is called Sattvika character. So it goes beyond action. It is not devoid of, it is not opposite to action, but it goes beyond action. A really sattvic person, it's called, the word is sattvika. It has become so common. That book is very frequently used in modern Western classical works on psychology, psychiatry, and so on. Means a state of human mind when you have reached wisdom, knowledge, inner tranquility, inner harmony, serenity, and peace. And of course, this is based on awareness and wisdom. This is sattvic quality. Its opposite is total inaction, complete inertia, rooted in ignorance, laziness. So it's the very opposite of sattvika. It is called tamasika. Tamasika actually means darkness, means ignorance, lack of knowledge. Sattvika is related to light, means wisdom. So inaction due to wisdom means you understood the limitations of action, so you have gone beyond it, but you are certainly capable of action. Its opposite is tamasika. These are the terms used in this chapter. It's better as a few words of this vocabulary may be familiarized with advantage for our own advantage. The stage between the two is called Rajasika, means full of action, total selfishness. Well, I can explain these three characteristics in the light of human behavior patterns. That will make things more easy. So, in fact, these illustrations are taken from this 17th chapter. If a person wants to make some donation, do something, maybe do some charitable activity, a person who is highly evolved, sattvic type, he will do the charity to some charitable organization which is doing good work. He will make sure that his money will be properly made use of. And he will donate this, he will give this charity with great humility. With great humility. And he will be very careful to see that nobody comes to know of that. So he will not advertise his philanthropical activities. So there is humility, there is wisdom, there is perfect harmony. Now, a person who belongs to the second category, the Rajasic type, first he will make a big advertisement, and then he will always expect something in return. Whatever he gives, he expects something in return. Otherwise, he won't give anything to anybody. The third type, he will throw away with his left hand at a distance and ask the poor fellow, you take it or leave it. I'm just giving the three examples. The least evolved persons are full of ignorance, arrogance, haughtiness in whatever they do. Their whole personality is rooted in ignorance, in terms of, spiritual ignorance. The highest one is rooted in wisdom and knowledge. The middle one, the second category, they do certain good things, but not unselfish, selfish activities. But remember, it is always better to do something selfish than doing nothing. It is all because a person who is active, who is doing something, maybe out of selfishness, will one day graduate to a higher level of spiritual evolution and will start doing the same good deeds with total unselfishness. But a person who is rooted in the lowest level of inertia and ignorance will never make any progress. Another example, in a general way, just to give a practical example of what these three categories actually mean in actual life. The highest person who is established in sattvic qualities. But the word sattva should be always understood in relation to, say, knowledge, wisdom, light, because it is symbol of light, symbol of knowledge and wisdom, serenity, it is a sign of inner evolution, progress, wisdom, tranquility, no tension within, absolute calmness, total humility. All these are the characteristics of a yogi, a person who has reached a very high level of spiritual progress. But those who want to do something good, those who want to attain higher spiritual yogic wisdom, making effort, but still not fully understood its true nature, but still making some effort, they may do something out of total selfishness. They may do a lot of good work, but they always want something in return. Those are totally ignorant will do nothing, because that's why, Swami Vivekananda once made a statement. If a beggar speaks about the transitoriness of worldly pleasures, the first thing you have to do is you have to make him work very hard with both his hands and in enough bread. Because he's asking for money, he's not willing to work for it. So Vivekananda makes an interesting statement. Another illustration I can give, that is from the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna was a great saint, most of you know, but a few of you may not be familiar. He was the great teacher of Swami Vivekananda, who is the founder of the organization, of which the Vedanta Society is a branch. Sri Ramakrishna was living in a temple in the city of Kolkata, and he spent 12 years in deep meditation, concentration, yogic practices, spiritual practices, and he became well known as a great saint of those days. Next to his room, there was another gentleman staying. His name was Hazra. Now, Sri Ramakrishna will get up early in the morning or at night, go and walk to the nearby forest, small forest nearby. Now it's called Panchavati. He will sit under a tree and will remain the whole night immersed in meditation. Nobody will know that Sri Ramakrishna was spending all these hours in spiritual practices. For 12 years he continued like this and became a great saint, a man who realized the highest spiritual wisdom. Next to him, another gentleman was staying, Azra. First thing that he did was he bought a big tiger skin. The tiger skin was considered to be an auspicious seat on which to sit and meditate. So all the great saints and sages, if you see the pictures of ancient Indian ascetics and yogis, you find them sitting on a tiger skin. So the first thing that this man did was, he bought a big tiger skin and we hung it in front of his door. And he will have a big Rudraksha beard, maybe it's with some golden beads in between, that people will be attracted by that, with a long beard, with the typical old religious symbols, markings of ashes, sandal paste and so on. And he will be apparently he'll try to meditate, practicing yoga. But occasionally, frequently, he used to tell people, he used to ask for some little money also from people. So, and he wanted to attract people. He used to ask for money. At the same time, apparently, he was practicing this kind of spiritual practice. Classic example, to give an illustration. Sri Ramakrishna was the very embodiment of sattvic qualities. Another man was, Azra was an embodiment of rajasiga qualities. Just to give an illustration. Now we will come to the text. If I just give an idea of this illustration. So first verse is important. Ye shastra vidhi mutsrijya yajante shraddhayanvitaha tesham nishtha tuka krishna sattu maho rajastamaha. Here Arjuna is asking a question. Of course, the question has some reference to the previous chapter, last verse of previous chapter. In the last verse of the previous chapter, Krishna made one interesting statement. The statement is, Yes shastra vidhim utsrijya vartade kamakaradaha nasa siddhim avapnodi na sukham na paramkati. Sri Krishna said in the last verse of the last chapter, 16th chapter, but there are people who do not give much importance to the instructions given in books, which are supposed to be followed by all spiritual aspirants. But then they want to do spiritual practices, and they do everything under their own impulse. They may have some faith. The faith may be the highest faith, sattvic faith, rajasic faith, or tamasic faith. And therefore, Krishna says, Tasmat shastram pramanam te karya akari vyavasthidu jnatva shastra vidhanoktam karma kartum iha arhasi. Therefore, this shastra here means, to be very frank, the conduct of those who have attained spiritual knowledge. That's the meaning of shastra, science of spiritual practice. Just as there's a science in modern phenomenological or empirical pursuits of knowledge, there is also a science in the area of spiritual practices. That book, here Shastra here means a series of instructions based on the life experiences of great souls who have attained spiritual wisdom by following certain disciplines. Well, that applies equally well in modern science also. Can we go against the laws, scientific laws discovered by the great scientists of the past? When you use mathematics, when you study physics, can we deny what Newton and Einstein taught? Said Newton was wrong, Einstein was wrong, and then what physics do we have today? So, in the area of modern sciences, empirical sciences also, we follow a shastram. What is the shastras? The shastras means nothing but the experiences of the great scientists who lived and worked and discovered the great scientific laws and principles. We cannot violate that. 2 plus 2 is 4 is a scientific formula, mathematical formula, which scientists, mathematicians discovered long back. Today we cannot alter that and make another thing. We can't do that. Similarly, in spiritual science also, there is Shastra means science. Shastra means science, which means nothing but principles and disciplines and conducts of the great spiritual teachers who experimented and discovered the highest spiritual truths in their life through their actual experiments, remember. All the great scientists discovered great scientific formulas and theories in laboratories, experimenting with the verifiable and verified laws of this empirical world. So also, the great spiritual teachers of the world also discovered, as Newton discovered, as Einstein discovered, Shankaracharya discovered, Jesus discovered, Buddha discovered, Sri Ramakrishna discovered in our own times, the great spiritual laws in modern times. That's the meaning of Shastra. So, anybody who really wants to reach the highest attainment in yoga should follow the Shastra, these disciplines. So that's the first question. Now remember, I have to elaborate this further because this is going to be a rather long discussion that we have started today. We'll continue in the next class. So a little more explanation is necessary. What is the meaning of science of spirituality in Vedanta and Yoga? We have to remember, in Yoga and Vedanta, there are three important criteria. There are three important methods in the pursuit of spiritual experience. Both are important. The first one is Shastram. You may equate it, though not very accurately, you may equate it with theology. Theology may not always necessarily mean verified teachings and spiritual laws discovered through their spiritual experiences, through spiritual practice by the saints and sages. But that's what is meant by, it's called Shruti it's called Shastram. The second point, the second approach is logic. You read in a book, these are the things to be followed. If it is against the basic principles of human logic, you need not accept it. So it is verifiable and verified. It means things as they are. But then one interesting aspect of human mind is a human mind which is pure, which is really seeking the truth. Logic for such a human mind is a balancing mechanism. But that's why Vivekananda, in one context, made a statement in the inspiring talks. He says, if somebody comes to you and claims to be inspired and speaks utter nonsense, reject him. The point is, suppose somebody says, well, I'm inspired, I'm spiritually enlightened, and speaks things against harmony, morality, good universal brotherhood, some fundamental, very obvious ethical and moral principles. And he says some God came to him, or angel, somebody came to him and told him, this is the message from God. Don't accept it. So real spiritual knowledge may not be within the range of human logic, but it will never contradict human logic. It's a very important principle in Yoga and Vedanta. See, the highest spiritual experience goes beyond the reach of all epistemological tools. If you believe in Aristotle, direct perception and inference and comparison. But in Vedanta, they accept 6 tools in epistemology: direct perception, inference, pratyaksha, anumana, upamana means comparison, then verbal testimony, presumption, And of course, its absence. Its absence also gives you the knowledge of its being absent. That's also knowledge. That person is not present. It's a knowledge about the absence of that person. So that's Vedanta. Vedanta accepts 6 epistemological tools. Some of the fringe groups of Indian philosophy adds 4 more, but they are actually extensions of these 6 epistemological tools. Okay, now coming to the subject, as I said earlier, what a religious scripture says, Shastram as you call it, Shruti or Upanishad, let's say Upanishad says, it may be beyond human logic, but it should never go against human logic. It could transcend human logic, but it cannot be in conflict with human logic. So Shankaracharya says, Srutya, first you listen to the scriptures. Listen carefully, analyze, and then try to test its accuracy on the touchstone of your own brain, your own analytical power. Of course, we should be totally free from prejudices and fanaticism. Then only our brain will work. So we should be totally non-partisan. We should be totally free from prejudices. If we can analyze and understand these universal spiritual principles, then we understand it may be beyond logic, but it's certainly not illogical. And one very important reason why Vivekananda could make such an impact on the World Parliament of Religion in 1893, one important reason was this. He said, you need not believe what I say. You think for yourself. God didn't ask me to tell you that you should accept Him. You think for yourself. So a religion or a religious philosophy which is not afraid of science, which is not afraid of even atheism, which is not afraid of unbelievers' logic, which is not afraid of the challenges that many of the established religions were confronting in the later half of 19th century. Swami Vivekananda said, Vedanta is not afraid. Vedanta doesn't ask you to become anything, to give up anything. Vedanta just tells you what you really are. And Vedanta tells you that you are actually, in reality, you are the divine spirit within. And all the spiritual practices, going to churches, temples, worship, different kinds of worships, all are nothing but attempts to realize our true reality, which now remains concealed. In fact, every spiritual practice is an attempt to remove the layers and layers of concealing wraps that prevent us from seeing what it really is, from realizing our true personality. So the second point is yukti. Yukti means logic. So first is scripture, srutya. So it means yukti, means logic. So scriptures should be listened to, should be read, but then they should be properly analyzed. We can use our own reasoning power. And then it should not end there. So Vedanta says it should be brought to our real experience. So anubhuti, our own experience. So scriptures, logical reasoning, and our own inner experience. These are the 3 criteria. These are the 3 levels in the evolution of a person who is in pursuit of spiritual wisdom, yogic wisdom, according to Gita. Now, here, Lord Krishna is explaining one important point. In the second verse, he says, Trividha bhavati shraddha, dehinam swa subhavaja, satviki rajasi chaiva, tamasi cheditam. I have already explained this. This shraddha, this belief, this integrity, is threefold. The highest based on wisdom, in serenity, spiritual evolution. The second one, which is certainly not the highest, but not the lowest either. It is the middle one, full of action, full of selfish action. One danger of this kind of too much of ambitious, selfish action for a spiritual person is it could divert him in the opposite direction any moment. So action should be always guided by wisdom. Otherwise, action may, and very often it does, take us in the opposite direction. Okay, now, to begin with, Lord Krishna deals with a very important subject, and he is talking about food here. Food that we eat. He says, what we eat in a way decides how we behave. So mind is the end product of the subtle aspects, subtle elements of the food that we eat. What are the subtle elements? Gross elements we know very well. Well, to explain one point, suppose we eat food. It is perfectly produced, maybe bought from the best shop, very hygienic. And, well, you got green signal from your dietitian or doctor. It's the best food that's available. But suppose somebody offers you that food with total indifference, even arrogance, disrespect. You eat it or throw it away that way. Well, from a subtle point of view, that food becomes affected. Because when you eat that food which you received not with any respect or humility, with total disrespect, arrogance, what happens? Your mind gets hurt. And with that mind which is hurt, if you eat that food becomes affected. So here, physically it's perfectly all right. But from the higher point of view, that food is no more sattvic food. That is the idea behind. To give an opposite example, suppose somebody gives you ordinary food, maybe not as nutritious, as rich as the food that we mentioned earlier, but with great respect. Maybe your own mother or grandmother gives with great affection. That food becomes sattvic, because when you receive it, your mind, when you look at the face of your affectionate mother or grandmother, whoever may be, then that food, then your mind reacts to that mood, the behavior. And that mind affects the food that you eat. So what happens? That food becomes sattvic. To give an example, the subtle aspect of food. Subtle aspect of food is invisible. It cannot be verified in the laboratory. If you take these two types of food to the laboratory, the first food may be nutritious food, McDonald's, hamburger, may be very rich and nutritious, but given with total disregard, contempt, and you are in a helpless state, you have to eat it. But if you take it, then that food may affect your system. It may not affect your system, but it is because it's good for building up muscle and body. But it may affect the mind, because when you ate it, your mind was not in a good mood. That mind could create problems. So it becomes non-sattvic, to give an example. The other example, if you take it to the laboratory, maybe the dietitian would say it is not balanced diet. But you are getting from a grandmother or grandfather great affection and love. So what happens? That also elevates your mind. You are happy, you eat it. So here, just giving an example, what are the subtle characteristics of food that we eat? Okay, this is one example. So I'm just giving here in the 7th verse, Lord Krishna says, I want to begin with this because there are many things to be stated from this chapter. I begin with the 7th verse. Aharastubi sarvasya trividho bhavadi priyaha yajñas tapas tadha dhanam tesham bhedamimam srunu. Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna that even the food that we eat is also liked by each of them, threefold divisions. Then he says, Ayush sattu balarogya sukha pridi vivardhanaha rasya snigdha sthira hridya ahara sattvika priya. Here you have to remember, Lord Krishna is not, the teacher is not dealing with the subtle aspect of the characteristics which I mentioned earlier. But normally when traditional teachers teach this, they often refer to this. Otherwise, there is a reason for it. Sometimes you find some of the worst villains of world history were eating this sattvic food, physically sattvic food that you see. For example, here, the food which augment vitality, energy, strength, health, cheerfulness, appetite. These are all very good, sattvika. And so you may have heard perhaps, sometimes you may have heard that meat and such things are rajasika food, not sattvic food. And pure milk, vegetables, pure fresh vegetables, roots, these are wonderful sattvic food. Well, Hitler was a vegetarian. Do you think he was an embodiment of sattvic qualities? Buddha was a non-vegetarian. Poor man died. You know how he died? He had to eat the meat of maybe an animal which was shot by a hunter with poisoned arrow. So that meat was poisoned. Buddha was the embodiment of sattvic qualities. So why I'm giving the other aspect of it. Sri Krishna will deal with this subject elsewhere. We will come to that later. Lord Krishna, the teacher of Gita, gives a very well-balanced, a complete, a compact set of instructions. But in these verses, he is not dealing with that aspect. He is dealing with the physical, the physical aspect of it. So here he says the food that is sattvika is, it should improve your vitality, energy, strength, health, cheerfulness, appetite, etc. That's what he says. Sri Ramakrishna, to give a complete picture of what I said earlier, gives the example. If you take the name of God and eat beef, it is good, sattvic. Remember, you should not have any misunderstanding. Beef was taboo to most of all the listeners who came to Sri Ramakrishna. So they never ate beef for religious reasons. That's why he gave this example. So you eat any kind of food. If you've got a good mind, calm and quiet, that food becomes sattvic. If Hitler eats fresh milk and roots and vegetables, it doesn't mean sattvic food, no. And Buddha ate poisoned meat. It was certainly sattvic, because Buddha, that's why Sri Ramakrishna says Buddha was the embodiment of sattvic qualities. So fundamentally, essentially, it is the human mind that decides what is good and what is bad. That's very important to decide. It is human mind that finally decides what is good and what is bad. If there is a choice, an option between the physically verifiable qualities and the subtle invisible factors, then you have to judge everything on the basis of the subtle invisible factors. That's the idea behind. But then for all beginners in spiritual life, perhaps it's better to avoid too much of food that creates tension, maybe undesirable impulses, emotions, that may be good for a beginner, that's all. So I want to stress this point again. Ultimately, whether a food is good or bad is decided not by the physically verifiable aspects of that, or what we eat or drink, but our mind, our own nature. That's the idea behind. But Lord Krishna, the reason why he gives this description here is that for a beginner it may be helpful to confine ourselves to food items which may not produce too much of tension or emotional impulses within the mind. You see, time is over. Now, I think today we will not be able to complete the subject. This discussion will continue in the next class. And you can ask in some questions if you want any very favorite questions. In a general way, you can ask. We have 10-15 minutes. We didn't have class in the last 2 weeks perhaps, so you can have a detailed discussion. If you don't have any questions, of course, I can go back to the text. We have some time left. Any discussion?
Swamiji, are these qualities in the light of Vedanta, the sattvic, the monastic, and the rajasic qualities, are they immutable, or is an individual able to change them or mitigate them?
They are not absolute values. These are not absolute values. That's why I mentioned. So good that you asked this question. What we eat, how we dress, all these are not absolute values. So Gita contains universal spiritual values which are meant for all. Also some other instructions which are changeable. For example, food habits, for example. The concept of sattvic food may be in one particular nation or culture, but it could be something else in other cultures, traditions. For example, the great Christian monasteries of Europe, the Middle Ages, they were well known for the high quality wine. There were great mystics and philosophers living there for centuries. So remember that. That's why, they are not absolute values. Food, what we eat, what we drink, dress, all these are more or less secondary details, but they do have an important place. In fact, the reason why these points are stressed here, Lord Krishna wants to take you beyond them. In fact, the reason one of the commentators made a beautiful statement. These ideas are stated here not as fundamental teachings for spiritual value. So you should be peaceful, calm, and when you practice meditation, you should look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family. You should, you cannot love God and hate His children. These are absolute fundamental teachings. But there are some non-fundamental teachings which are changeable, which are secondary values, not absolute universal values. They are stated here to drive home the point that they are all secondary values. That's the idea behind. So that's the importance of these verses. You follow the point? So that's why Sri Ramakrishna practically answered this question with a single sentence, most beautifully, emphatically. He says, if you take the name of God and eat beef, you are closer to God. But if you eat, it is called Havishyanam. Sri Ramakrishna uses the word Havishyanam, means rice cooked in fresh butter, which is cooked with the accompaniment of Vedic mantras and all that. But if you eat it and you don't take the name of God, if you don't think of God, if your mind is full of worldly thoughts, then this food is not sattvic. To give an illustration, that illustration is taken from the Gita, of course. So if you eat McDonald's hamburger with the name of God in mind, it becomes more sattvic. It's a spiritually healthy food. But if you eat pure milk and vegetables, but without any spiritual thoughts within your mind, full of worldly minded thoughts, then it is no more sattvic food. To drive home this idea. Yes. Any more? One of the commentators make a statement. It was Mahadev Desai who wrote down Gandhi's, Mahatma Ji's Anasakti Yoga means the sign. He interpreted as the book of selfless action. It's a major statement. Ultimately, all these things are changeable, mutable, as you said, from place to place, from culture to culture, from geography to geography. They are not absolute spiritual values. They are all based on certain customs and practices that prevailed in a particular region. That's all. If you don't have any further question, we are going to other important teachings in this book. Okay, now I shall complete this topic. 9th verse is Kattu Amla Levanatushna Tekshna Ruksha Vidahinaga Ahara Rajasa Seshta Dukkha Shoka Mayapradaha. Now, there are certain types of food that make us bitter, maybe morose, which may create pain, grief, tension. Food that's sour, very hot, very bitter, very pungent, very dry. Such food can create such sensations within the mind. First. I shall finish the next one. 10th one. Yatayamam gadarasam pudi parishitam chiyat uchishtam abhichamedhyam bhojanam tamasapriyam. The worst kind of food is mentioned. I mean, a food that is stale, tasteless, stinking, cooked overnight. Remember, I know that this, just you know why I'm explaining this, to show that these are all secondary details. I mean, because Lord Krishna is going to deal with the fundamental teachings, it's a contrast. So that food is stale or stinking or tasteless or cooked long ago, is refuse, impure, these food items are not good. Now, here again, Lord Krishna is going to deal with some other important human activities. How we talk and behave, and this is also very important. These are very important. These are fundamental characteristics of a true yogi. What are the characteristics of a true yogi? How does a yogi behave? What kind of words he uses? It comes in the 15th verse. Anudvegakaram vakyam satyam prehidam chayat swadhyaya abhyasanam chaiva vangmayam tapa uchyate. Speech, words, our way of talk, they also belong to 3 categories: the highest, the most enlightened, the middle, and the lowest. A speech which doesn't create tension and conflict and confusion among others, which do not create a ripple, a tension, a most unhealthy, undesirable impulse in the listeners. And a speech that is true. We should not be diplomatic to avoid creating tension to others. That will not become the speech of a yogi. So it should be based on truth. At the same time, it should not create any vexation. And that speech should contain an idea which will be helpful to others. It should be agreeable and beneficial to the listener. That is the speech pattern of a true yogi. Here, the speech characteristics are divided into 2 categories in the commentaries. One is what is pleasant to the listener. The other is what is needed for the listener. It's a very important characteristic. When we speak something to a person, it should contain an idea that will be helpful to him, that should not be harmful to him. Suppose we make a very pleasant speech, we talk something which apparently is very good, very pleasant to hear, but may not be good for others. It is not good. I can just quote one verse here from Ramayana. It's a famous verse. The verse is this. Sulabha purusha loke satatam priyavadinaha apriyasya pathyasya vakta srota sudurlabha. This is a verse. The meaning is very, very relevant. There are certain people who are very rare in this world. The speakers of unpleasant truths. And also the listeners. See, to speak the unpleasant truth to somebody, you should have a lot of courage and you should be totally unselfish, because your words may make the other man disagree with you. You may not get, that person you may be antagonizing him. Why should you take the trouble to tell somebody, which may be essential for him? He may be heading for a precipice, for a fall, for a danger. And if you tell him, well, don't go this way, he may curse you. Because that's the sort of person you are talking to. Many people, why should I advise him that unnecessary, take the burden? So people normally don't do that. So it takes a lot of spiritual courage, a higher spiritual wisdom, to tell somebody what he may not like to hear, but something that may save him, something that will be helpful to him. So that's the meaning of the statement. There are many people who will tell you what they think you would be very happy to hear. So the speakers and listeners are plenty. So we always want to hear something that are pleasant, that may not be good for us, may be harmful, but still pleasant, that we would like to hear. Speakers are plenty. They also want, there are schizophrenics, schizophrenics are there, and of course, flatterers. So there are many flatterers and also many people who would like to keep themselves surrounded by flatterers. So that is Sulabha Purusha Loke Satatam Priyavadina. Priyavadina means those who are always eager to tell good things which they think the other man is very happy to listen to. That's one way of bribing him, maybe misleading him. Plenty. Listeners are also speakers. But both listeners and speakers are very rare of what? Unpleasant truths. So pathyam is the word used here, To give an example, in traditional old schools of medicine, they not only give you medicines, but they also tell you that you should not eat certain types of food. In modern medicine also, doctors will tell you should avoid these food items. It's not good. That food item is priyam. See, you have got the highest diabetes, but you're a great glutton. You like to eat plenty of Indian sweets, jalebis, sweets, or plenty of things. If somebody tell you eat plenty of sweets, he'll be very happy, but he may have to go to hospital next day. So the point is, so pathya means what is good. At the same time, what may not be necessarily pleasant. Do's and don'ts, which are essential for the health. So, Lord Krishna says, the really evolved yogi will tell certain things which will be not only pleasant for the other man to hear, but also will be useful to him. Of course, only a great yogi can say that, because great spiritual persons can put things, even most unpleasant but useful things, in a language that will not hurt others. That's the idea behind. So yogi goes beyond the other category which I mentioned, those who tell you unpleasant truths. For they are certainly far better than flatterers. But here, this 17th chapter says, the highest yogi is a person who will tell you what you need to hear, what it will be useful and essential for you to hear, because you will be benefited by that. At the same time, you'll be happy to hear. Both this combination, that is the characteristic of the speech pattern, the conversational style of a spiritually evolved person. Again, I cannot give a more graphic example of some of the conversations that Sri Ramakrishna had with his devotees. I quoted one here in the Olima retreat program, classic example. See, once a group of businessmen came to him. They were running the business houses of Kolkata. They had their own religion. They used to build temples. They were very rich also. Some of them were cutthroat businessmen also. But they used to build huge temples. They're far better than those who never do anything, So they went to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna understood very well that these people cannot and will not practice anything if we spoke to them about yoga, about renunciation, about unselfishness. How can you tell businessmen to practice unselfishness? You have to work without any profit motive. He will think this is not for me, so he never come here again to Vedanta Society. So, what an ideal teacher should tell them? Sri Ramakrishna says, you are all very intelligent, clever people. You are like a king fighting within his fort, surrounded by his garrison. So, you are living in your home, you are running business, you are making a lot of profit, and also you had the wisdom to come and seek spiritual instruction from me. You do one thing. Sri Ramakrishna knew the exact dose of spiritual instruction that they would be able to digest. So he said, well, you run your business, you go about performing your worldly responsibilities, don't worry. But once a while, you go to a temple, once a while you read a holy scripture, you go and meet a holy person and discuss spiritual ideas. So Sri Ramakrishna gave them the exact spiritual instruction which we will certainly practice. So, a classic example of the sattvic pattern of speech that is mentioned here. So that's why, anudvegagaram vakyam, it should not create vexation or confusion in their mind. If you tell them something with highest renunciation, they'll be terribly petrified. They will conclude that religion and spirituality are of no practical use to them because they're businessmen. So you have to take them from where they stand to the next nearest step. Gradual, natural evolution in spiritual life. So he said, you are good, you run your business, but once in a while you do some charity. They will certainly make profit. You cannot talk to them about how sinful it is to make profit. They can't do that. You cannot talk to them about renunciation. So what is it? You make profit, all right. A little of your profit you spend for philanthropical activities. And once in a while you go to a holy man, holy woman, holy person and discuss spiritual matters. Once in a while you pray. These are the instructions which Sri Ramakrishna gives. And that fully benefited them. So it should be beneficial to the other person. It should not give them the idea that these instructions are beyond their reach. A classic example of speech pattern of a highly enlightened person. So we'll continue the discussion in the next class. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.